She dressed as a beggar to find a kind wife for her lonely billionaire dad. And what happened changed everything. When her billionaire father saw his daughter begging on the street wearing old, torn clothes, he became furious. What did he do to his daughter that made everyone standing there cry tears of blood? What happened next will shock you. Let story begin.
No longer did the mansion echo with laughter. No longer did the dining table hold warmth. Kamau had become a man of cold routines, polished shoes, quiet meals, long boardroom meetings, and endless gazes into nothing. And though the world still admired him, some for his genius, others for his bank account, Alicia knew, deep in her soul, that her father was lonely. But love, especially for a man of his stature, had become a dangerous game. Women had come and gone, models, celebrities, women of charm and class. Yet none had stayed. All seemed more enchanted by his bank statements than his broken heart. Alicia had seen it in their eyes, that subtle flicker of calculation, the carefully chosen words, the laughs that were too perfect to be real. And the more Kamau withdrew, the more determined Alicia became to fix what the world had taken from him. She believed love still existed, pure, unpolished, and real. But how could one find it in a world where masks were worn as easily as jewelry?
That's when Alicia made her decision. One so bold, so unthinkable, even her closest friends would have called it madness. She would search for love herself, not for her, but for him. Not the kind of love that sparkled on red carpets or whispered in ballrooms, but the kind that showed up for no reason other than kindness. And to find it, she had to become invisible. She shed her silks and satins, traded her gold for rust, and transformed her identity completely. With the help of a trusted family doctor, she placed a faint but convincing scar on her cheek, a story etched in skin. Her smooth hands were smudged with soot, her flawless skin hidden beneath layers of sun-worn dust. She slipped into the city wearing worn-out clothes, dusty slippers, and a weathered shawl. Her face, once known on social pages and high society galas, was now just another forgotten soul in the crowd. She became unrecognizable, a beggar among millions. Every morning, she sat near a busy market corner where commuters passed with briefcases and bags of hope. Some spared a glance, others didn't. She didn't speak much, just held a small hand-drawn sign that read, "Just need water and a smile." Days turned into weeks. She observed people, their hearts unveiled in the way they treated the forgotten. She wasn't looking for charity, she was looking for character. Some gave money out of guilt, others gave food out of habit. But then there were a few, very few, who stopped and saw her. They asked her name. They sat beside her for a moment. They offered warm words rather than coins. These were the moments she lived for. Yet none of them, though kind, felt right for her father, until one overcast afternoon, when the clouds hung low and the city air smelled like rain, a young woman named Amina stopped by. She wasn't dressed in luxury. She wore a faded nurse's uniform and carried a plastic grocery bag half filled with essentials. Her face was kind, her eyes deep with quiet wisdom, and her smile, it wasn't forced. It was the kind of smile that made the world pause. She knelt beside Alicia and, without a word, opened her bag. From it, she pulled out a sealed water bottle, a pack of biscuits, and a small wrapped cloth, a piece of roasted sweet potato. "You look tired," she said gently, her voice soft like a lullaby. "I was once here too, not begging, but searching." Alicia was caught off guard, not just by the offering, but by the sincerity in Amina's gaze. She didn't ask where Alicia was from, didn't question the scar or the silence. She didn't assume. She only gave. And when Alicia finally spoke, asking her name, Amina simply smiled and said, "I work at the city clinic. I help where I can. That's all I know how to do." She didn't linger. She didn't take a photo or post a story. She left quietly, disappearing into the crowd like she was never there. But for Alicia, something shifted. This woman, who had little,
gave everything that mattered. The next few days, Alicia returned to the same spot, hoping Amina would come again, and she did. Not every day, but often enough, sometimes with food, sometimes with words, sometimes with silence. And with each visit, Alicia saw more: the way Amina greeted the street vendors by name, how she helped an old man cross the road even when she was running late. She didn't wear goodness as a badge, she lived it. Slowly, Alicia began to ask her questions about her family, her past, her pain. And in return, Amina shared stories of a childhood marked by struggle, a mother lost to illness, and a dream of one day opening a clinic of her own in the rural areas where no doctor ever went. She had no idea she was being watched, not just by a girl in disguise, but by fate itself. Back at home, Kamau noticed his daughter's absence more frequently, but he didn't question it. She had always been free-spirited, always chasing ideas and causes. Little did he know she was chasing something far more valuable now, a chance at restoring his joy. Weeks passed, and the connection between the beggar and the nurse grew into something unspoken. Not friendship, not dependence, but a mutual understanding. And when Alicia finally returned home one evening, stepping out of her disguise, she sat across from her father at the long dinner table and said with quiet conviction, "I think I've found her. The one who won't care about your money, the one who might actually care about you." Kamau looked at her confused, skeptical. He asked, "And how would you know?" She smiled, "Because she's kind to someone she thinks has nothing." And so began the next chapter, a test of truth, a dance of destiny, as one man's broken heart was about to collide with the purest act of unseen love. But neither Kamau nor Amina could possibly know what fate had quietly set into motion, all because a daughter dared to walk among the forgotten, to find the one who remembered what it meant to see a soul. It was a cold, rainy evening near the edge of the market, the kind where umbrellas bloom like flowers and puddles reflect tired feet rushing to get home. Alicia sat silently on the damp sidewalk, her disguise now soaked from the drizzle that refused to stop. She was hunched over, arms wrapped around herself, shivering, not just from the cold that clung to her skin, but from the growing doubt that maybe this mission was foolish, maybe no one truly kind still walked this earth. People passed her like she was invisible, umbrellas tilting away, footsteps speeding up, faces turned toward brighter storefronts and dry taxis. Nobody looked down, nobody saw her. And just when the ache in her chest deepened, not from hunger, but from hopelessness, someone stopped. A woman, barefoot, her hair slightly damp, her hands calloused from labor, and 2 sacks of vegetables dangling from thin fingers that trembled with exhaustion. She didn't look wealthy, she didn't even look stable, yet her eyes, oh her eyes, they glowed with something Alicia hadn't seen in a long time, unfiltered human compassion. The woman knelt slowly, despite the wet ground soaking into her worn dress. Without saying much, she reached into her bag and pulled out the last piece of bread she had, gently unwrapped it from cloth and handed it to Alicia. "You don't deserve this cold," she said softly, then removed the shawl from around her own shoulders, the only thing shielding her from the wind, and carefully wrapped it around Alicia's trembling frame. "Here," she whispered, as though the world didn't need to know what she'd just done. That moment struck Alicia like lightning. Not just because she was cold or hungry or tired, but because never in her life had someone done something this kind for her without knowing who she was, without the polished car, without her famous surname, without bodyguards or media flashes. No recognition, no hidden motive, just a woman who saw another woman in need and gave away her own comfort without hesitation. That woman's name, Alicia later learned, was Amina. But in that first moment, names didn't matter. What mattered was the warmth of a stranger's hands, the honesty in her voice, and the quiet dignity with which she walked away, barefoot through the muddy street, as if this kind of sacrifice was ordinary for her. Alicia clutched the bread in one hand and the shawl around her shoulders, her disguise now suddenly too heavy for her heart to carry. That night she didn't sleep. Her mind played the scene over and over again. not out of gratitude, but disbelief. Why would someone with so little give so much to a nobody? The very next morning, driven by something she couldn't name, Alicia followed Amina. From a distance, careful not to be seen, she tracked her through narrow alleys and busy roads, watching as Amina arrived at a small rundown clinic tucked between aging buildings. Its sign was faded, the walls chipped, the windows cracked. Yet inside, the place breathed with life. Amina worked with quiet urgency, tending to crying children, gently changing the dressings of old women, holding trembling hands of sick men who had lost all hope. She cleaned wounds without gloves, offered medicine without charging a coin, and listened more than she spoke. And when an angry man stormed in, waving cash and demanding a false diagnosis so he could avoid prison time, Amina stood tall, voice calm but firm, refusing his money, even as her colleagues looked away. Integrity was stitched into her skin. Alicia watched it all, hidden behind a tinted glass window from across the street. Every act, every choice Amina made unfolded like a story that wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't pretending to be noble. She wasn't recording videos for praise. She was just real. And in that reality, Alicia saw something rare. Something her father had been searching for all along, though he never admitted it out loud. A woman who didn't bend for money. A woman who didn't love attention. A woman whose dignity wasn't based on status or wealth. Alicia followed her again the next day, and the next. She saw Amina help an elderly vendor carry crates uphill. She saw her offer a mother her lunch when she couldn't afford baby formula. She saw her sitting in silence beside a dying patient, just holding his hand because no one else would. But the more Alicia learned about Amina, the heavier her own secret became. She began to wonder, would Amina still be this gentle, this selfless, if she knew the truth? That the woman sitting in rags that rainy evening was not a beggar, but the daughter of a billionaire. That this was all part of a plan. That the cold, the scar, the dusty slippers, none of it was real. Would Amina feel betrayed? Used? Alicia's heart trembled at the thought. She didn't want to hurt her, but how could she ever reveal the truth now? Everything about their brief interaction had been so pure, untouched by judgment or reward. What would happen if the mask came off? That question haunted her. She returned to her own home each evening, shed the disguise, and sat across from her father, unsure of how to bring up what she had found. Not a woman with a flawless resume, not a woman with red carpet grace, but a woman with no shoes and a heart that walked with every broken soul it met. And for Alicia, that was more valuable than any diamond necklace or designer dress she'd ever owned. She had seen the rarest jewel, not worn around a neck, but beating in the chest of a barefoot healer. As the days passed, Alicia kept watching, torn between her role as a silent observer and the need to do something, anything, to bring Amina into her father's world. But she knew this could not be forced. Amina had to choose kindness, not be bought into it. She had to meet Kamal as herself and love him for who he was, not for what his empire could offer. And so the plan in Alicia's mind began to shift. This wasn't just about finding someone kind, it was about earning that kindness with truth. But for that, she would need to take a risk that could change everything. A week had passed since the rainy evening when a barefoot woman changed everything. Alicia had watched, followed, and felt 1,000 emotions rise within her: admiration, awe, and a strange kind of reverence. But now it was time. The moment she had feared and prepared for. She could no longer stay hidden behind a scar and dusty slippers. The truth needed to meet the light. And if Amina was truly the woman Alicia believed she was, then the truth wouldn't break the bond, it would deepen it. That morning, Alicia dressed in a rich, flowing African gown of emerald and gold, a piece her late mother once wore on special days. It was elegant, but not loud. traditional yet graceful. Her driver, waiting outside the gates, opened the door of a sleek black car that rolled silently through the city streets until it stopped at the corner near the weathered clinic where Amina worked. Raindrops still hung on leaves from the night before, and the smell of wet earth drifted through the air. People glanced curiously as Alicia stepped out, polished, regal, unmistakably someone of status. But her eyes searched only for one person. And then she saw her, Amina, hunched slightly under the faded clinic sign, balancing a clipboard in one hand and directing an elderly man toward a waiting bench. She was barefoot again, her hair pulled back in a quick knot, her uniform stained at the edges. Alicia took a deep breath and walked forward, her footsteps soft but sure. Amina turned, confused by the unexpected presence of someone so out of place in this world. Before she could speak, Alicia smiled gently and said, "I want to invite you for tea." Amina blinked. Her lips parted, but no words came out. It wasn't just surprise, it was disbelief. Why would someone like this, someone who clearly came from wealth, ask her, a clinic nurse with mud on her feet, to tea? Then Alicia leaned closer and whispered, "I was the beggar you helped, the one with the scar."
That sentence shifted the entire air around them. Amina's eyes widened in shock. She took a small step back, searching Alicia's face with confusion and disbelief. And then it hit her. The voice, the shape of the eyes, the look that once pleaded for warmth on a rainy night. Suspicion flickered in her expression. Was this a game? Was she being mocked? But before she could retreat, she saw something in Alicia's gaze. Sincerity. Vulnerability, no pretense, no hidden motive, just a girl trying to make a connection. Slowly, Amina nodded, though her brows remained furrowed. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because I owe you a moment of truth," Alicia replied, "and because there's someone I want you to meet." Amina didn't dress up. She didn't have the clothes for it. She came exactly as she was, in her worn sandals, with her bag slung over one shoulder, and her eyes still trying to make sense of what was happening. When the gates of the Kamau estate opened, she stepped inside a world she had never imagined. The driveway was paved with white stone, fountains danced in manicured gardens, and tall glass windows reflected the sky like mirrors. The mansion stood like a silent monument, grand, intimidating, yet hollow. But Amina did not falter. She didn't stare in awe, didn't gape. She walked with the same quiet dignity she carried at the clinic, eyes steady, heart still cautious. Inside the drawing room, Mr. Kamau stood waiting. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, hands clasped behind his back, posture straight. A man used to power, used to silence. His expression at first was guarded. Another woman, another introduction. But when Alicia gently placed her hand on his arm and said, "This is the woman I told you about," something shifted in his gaze. Amina stepped forward and smiled, not nervously, not flirtatiously, but kindly, with grace. "Mr. Kamau," she said simply, "thank you for inviting me." They sat down for tea, a ritual that once had no meaning for Kamau. Tea had been his late wife's favorite. Since her passing, he had drunk it alone or not at all. But today the cups were warm, the table was set, and something unfamiliar stirred in the room. At first, the conversation was polite, surface level. Kamal asked about Amina's work, and she spoke plainly. He commented on the city's decay, and she gently challenged him, saying, "Decay isn't just in streets. Sometimes it's in hearts, too." Alicia watched quietly, her heart racing. Then, without prompt, Amina asked something that no one had dared in years. What was she like? Kamal looked up, startled. "Your wife," she clarified. "I imagine you must miss her." For a moment, Kamal said nothing. The silence was heavy. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his teacup but didn't drink. Then, in a voice that was more breath than words, he said, "She was kind, fierce, too good for me, really. I never deserved her, and yet she stayed."
Amina didn't offer empty comfort. She didn't say, "She's in a better place." She didn't shift uncomfortably or glance at the walls. She simply leaned forward and said, "That kind of love doesn't die. It just waits quietly." And just like that, something broke open in Kamal. Not with tears, not with dramatic outbursts, but with words. Real words. For the first time in years, he spoke. Really spoke. He talked about the nights he spent alone, the guilt he carried, the pressure of wealth, the ache of raising a daughter without her mother's warmth. He spoke of his fears of being wanted for what he had, not who he was. And Amina listened, not as someone trying to impress or fix him, but as someone who simply understood pain. She asked thoughtful questions. She told him about her own losses, her mother's death, the fear of never being enough, the exhaustion that comes with giving your all and still falling short. It wasn't a conversation between a billionaire and a barefoot nurse. It was two broken hearts finding a strange kind of symmetry. When the tea turned cold and the sun began to set outside the tall windows, Alicia knew this was no longer about testing kindness. This was something more, something sacred. The beginning of something unexpected. The sun had just begun to rise over the city, casting soft amber light across the Kamau estate. The house, normally filled with a quiet kind of stillness, now seemed to hum with something unspoken, a delicate tension that neither Kamau nor Alyosha could fully define. It had been several days since Amina had come for tea, yet her presence lingered in every room. In the warmth of the now-used teacups, in the softened expression on Kamau's face, in the silences that no longer felt hollow but reflective. That morning, Kamau stepped into his study, a space reserved for business, guarded thoughts, and heavy memories. But today, something unexpected lay at the center of his desk, a faded photo. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but as his eyes focused, time itself seemed to stop. In the photograph, standing beside a hospital bed, was his late wife, fragile, smiling weakly, and next to her, holding her hand, was Amina. Kamau's breath caught. The photo trembled in his fingers as he stared, not blinking, not moving. The image unlocked something he had buried deeply, the final days of his wife's life. Days filled with pain, long nights, hushed prayers. He remembered being there at first and then slowly pulling away, unable to watch the woman he loved fade away. He remembered the guilt, the helplessness, but he had never forgotten that someone stayed, someone who never left her side. He had always wondered who that was. A nurse, maybe, a volunteer. He hadn't asked. He hadn't had the strength to face it. Now the answer sat in front of him, staring back through time. Amina. The woman his daughter had brought home, the barefoot stranger who had offered no flattery, no charm, only truth. He sat down slowly, the photo still trembling in his hand. All the layers of his guarded life, the deals, the wealth, the boardrooms, the cautious introductions, suddenly collapsed into a single memory of a dying woman and a nurse who had chosen love over duty. When Alicia entered the room moments later, she saw her father in a state she had never witnessed before. Not stern, not distracted, but shaken. He held up the photo, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know who this is?" She looked and gasped. That's Amina," she said, confused. "But how?" Kamau leaned back, the weight of the moment pressing into his chest. "She was there. She was with your mother. Every night. Every moment I couldn't bear to be." Alicia's heart skipped. This wasn't just fate, this was something deeper, something written long before their plan ever began. When Kamau met Amina later that afternoon, the conversation was no longer polite or exploratory. It was personal. He brought the photo with him, and when he showed it to her, he didn't speak right away. He just watched her. Amina, upon seeing it, didn't flinch. She smiled, that same quiet, knowing smile, and gently said, "I was only doing what I wish someone would do for me if I were in her place." Keimao's voice trembled. "Why didn't you tell us?" She looked down, brushing invisible dust from her lap, and replied softly, "Some kindness doesn't need to be remembered, but it always finds its way back." Her words hung in the air like incense, sweet and powerful. And in that moment, Kemal realized the world he had built, the polished one, the one guarded by gates, by contracts, by handshakes and silences, had never given him anything this real. This woman had been a stranger, then a guest, but now she was something else entirely. She was a living reminder of love in its purest form, not loud, not decorated, just there, unwavering, uninvited, but unforgettable. Alicia sat beside her father, stunned by how destiny had unfolded. They had gone looking for someone kind, but fate had returned someone sacred, someone who had been there in their darkest hour, not for money, not for position, not even for thanks, but because it was the right thing to do. Amina had never mentioned it, not even once, not during tea, not when asked about her past, because her heart didn't need recognition, it only needed truth. Keimao's hands, once steady with deals and firm handshakes, now shook as he held the photo close to his chest. He wasn't just looking at an image, he was remembering the nights he had buried under distractions, the grief he had never processed, the kindness he had never acknowledged. And now that kindness was sitting across from him, still calm, still barefoot, still real. "You didn't have to come back," he whispered. Amina smiled again, this time with a hint of sadness. "I didn't. Life brought me." And Kemal nodded slowly, tears silently filling his eyes. "No," he said, "life returned you." For Alicia, watching this unfold was like watching a puzzle come together, one she hadn't even known existed. She had thought she was orchestrating a plan, disguising herself, testing hearts, but the universe had been playing its own song all along. Amina hadn't just passed their test. She had unknowingly written herself into their family story years ago, in a chapter none of them had opened, until now. That afternoon, the mansion didn't feel like stone and glass. It felt like memory, like healing. The echoes of sorrow were still there, yes, but softened now by something timeless. In the days that followed, Kemal and Amina spent more time together, not with grandeur or forced gestures, but in long walks through the garden, shared stories over simple meals, and quiet silences that didn't need to be filled. He asked about her life. She asked about his dreams. And for once, he spoke not as a billionaire, not as a guarded man, but as someone rediscovering what it meant to be seen. Amina never demanded anything. She still returned to the clinic, still gave more than she had, but in Kemal's heart, she had become something priceless, not because she reminded him of his wife, but because she reminded him of himself before the walls. And so the truth, unveiled not by confession but by fate, became the most powerful bond between them, a bond born not in wealth or desire, but in compassion, and in the quiet, sacred miracle of kindness that never asks to be remembered and yet always finds its way back home.
The media couldn't stop talking. Headlines splashed across every screen and newspaper. Billionaire marries a common nurse. Some treated it like gossip, others like a fairy tale, but Kemal paid no attention. He had lived through too many hollow headlines to care what the world thought. He didn't want glitz, cameras, or a red carpet wedding. Instead, he stood beneath the old baobab tree, the very place where he had once first held hands with his late wife, a quiet, sacred space surrounded not by luxury, but by memory. The tree's broad, wise branches stretched across the afternoon sky, casting shadows that danced in the breeze. Villagers gathered, not celebrities, not business tycoons, but real people with real hearts.
The air was filled with soft music from hand-carved flutes and local drums, the kind of melodies that carried both joy and nostalgia. Kamau, dressed not in a designer tuxedo, but in traditional African robes of soft gold and ivory, took Amina's hands gently. Her eyes, filled with a calm strength, met his without hesitation. There was no makeup masking her simplicity, no jewelry distracting from her sincerity, just a smile that came from a place deeper than time. Alicia stood nearby, holding back tears. This entire journey, which had started with her disguising herself as a beggar to test hearts, had somehow led them all to this extraordinary moment. Healing had happened in ways she hadn't planned. Love had returned not just for her father, but for everyone in their home. Truth had unfolded like a slow sunrise, and now, under this sacred tree, it all came together. The vows were short, honest. There were no rehearsed lines, no exaggerated promises, just one quiet moment after another, and yet the emotion that filled the air was overwhelming.
But just when it seemed the ceremony had come to an end, just when Amina's eyes had softened into peaceful acceptance, Kamau turned to the small crowd and did something no one expected. He cleared his throat gently, then looked at Amina with deep reverence and said, "This marriage, this union, is not just about love. It's a partnership, of vision, of healing, of purpose." The villagers leaned in. The drums fell silent. "Starting today," Kamau continued, "Amina will co-run the Kamau Foundation. Our work for orphaned children will now have her heart at its center. Her soul is too bright, too giving to remain in the shadows." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Amina's hand flew to her chest, stunned. She had never asked for this, never imagined a role beyond the simplicity of her quiet life. But Kamau wasn't finished. "When I built my empire," he said, "I thought wealth could fix what was broken inside me. But this woman, she walked beside my dying wife without ever asking for anything. She showed me, without a word, that true greatness isn't in what we own, but in what we give." Applause broke out, not thunderous, but heartfelt, rising from people who knew what it meant to struggle, to give, to love without condition. Amina, overcome, turned away briefly to compose herself, her fingers brushing against the bark of the baobab tree, as if drawing strength from the roots beneath it. And Alicia, now standing with both pride and humility, realized her plan had unfolded not just to unite two people, but to transform a legacy. What had begun as a simple act of curiosity, of testing whether someone could see past wealth, had revealed layers of kindness that money could never buy. Kamau, once cold and guarded, now stood open and alive. Amina, once unseen, now stood recognized. And Alicia, once playing pretend, now stood fulfilled. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the leaves, Kamau and Amina shared a quiet smile. Not everything needed words. Sometimes the soul remembers on its own. The villagers began to sing, soft old songs passed down from generations, songs that spoke of union and healing, of stars aligning, of destinies fulfilled. There was no spotlight, but the entire moment felt lit from within. Later that evening, as lanterns flickered and children danced barefoot in the grass, Alicia sat near the edge of the celebration, watching. A gentle breeze played with her hair as she whispered to herself, "Sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unlikely disguises." No one heard her, but in her heart, she knew. She hadn't just helped her father find love, she had helped him find purpose again. She had helped the world see that kindness, when it returns, doesn't knock. It simply walks in, quiet and powerful, just like Amina did. And as laughter echoed into the night and the stars took their places above the baobab tree, the world, for once, felt exactly as it should be.